All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time to attend part 3 of our webinar here. My name is Jesse Stife. I am the president of Reading League Florida. Really excited to bring you tonight's session, Teaching Foundational Reading Skills, Database Decision Making. Before we get started, again, just to kind of reiterate, I want to keep encouraging everyone to stay up to date with us at the Reading League Florida on social media. You can find us on Facebook at the Reading League Florida or at TRLFL. So follow us there if you're so inclined. You can also find us at fl.thereadingleague.org or on Twitter at the Reading League Florida. While you're there, while you're on our pages, if you want to make a donation, that would be great. Your membership helps us keep the lights on and to help keep this sort of free, high quality sessions coming. So we're all volunteer. We're a nonprofit organization, and so this is only a labor of love that everyone at the organization does for free. And so every penny from membership and donations goes right back into the organization. We want to keep all of our content free and publicly available, since we never want money to be a barrier for fantastic professional development. For tonight's webinar, we have the Q&A function open, and we welcome our live participants to ask questions during the presentation, where Dr. Burns will be taking questions at the end. Remember to use the Q&A to ask questions and the chat to make any sort of general comments. All right, and so it's my pleasure to kick it over to Dr. Matt Burns. Thank you all, and Dr. Holly Lane and Dr. Valentina Contest. Thank you for your time and for your work supporting educators across the country, and please take it away.
Hey, thank you. Thanks so much. This is great. I really appreciate this opportunity to. I just moved here to Florida in July, and I moved here from Missouri, and before that Minnesota. So I keep moving further south, and I feel really honored to be here and to be part of this team. I mean, this is a fantastic group to be affiliated with. And I'm still learning the state, still learning the districts. So any chance I get to make a connection to people in the district, although, as I said, welcome Katie from Maine and Susan from Winnipeg and Jessica from Washington. I'm really excited you're here as well. But I love these connections to the schools. And today we're going to talk about database decision making within foundational reading skills presented within MTSS. So I tell you, I'll be the one taking lead today. My colleagues Val and Holly will be here and chiming in as needed and as requested. I'll leave the chat open, so don't hesitate to throw stuff in chat if you have any questions, comments. Question and answer is open as well. I'll check that as well. I'm happy to make comments, respond to things as we go, and as I'm sure my colleagues are as well. So today we're going to talk about database decision making. So far, we've had it's the third session. The first one, Holly, in essence, led us and contextualized foundational reading skills within MTSS. And then the second one, a little more about what, how, why for foundational reading skills. Again, Drs. Lane and Contest, and when Val sort of taking lead on that one. And then tonight, it's database decision making. It's taking the data and using those data to make good decisions. And I will contextualize this within MTSS, focus on foundational reading skills, of course. So kind of trying to tie it all back together with MTSS. So you can't talk about MTSS without having this conversation. Now, when I say MTSS, of course, I mean multi-tiered systems of support. Okay, hopefully everyone knows that. But does anyone know where this thing came from? All of a sudden, we see MTSS mentioned everywhere. Well, where did this thing come from? It actually came from 2004. In 2004, when we reauthorized the special ed regulations, the law for special ed, and reauthorized IDEA, we put in this one regulation in 2004 to identify children with a learning disability. There are 4 things they said, but I'm going to point out one thing. One line, simple one line in all of the regulations from the special ed law has one line that says states must permit the use of a process that determines if the child responds to scientific research-based intervention as part of identifying a child with a learning disability. Literally, that one line is all that's in the regs. Now that became what we call response to intervention, RTI. Now, RTI and MTSS are not synonymous terms. When we started using RTI and wanted to look at how to identify kids with learning disabilities, we realized you can't do an RTI decision without first having an MTSS in place. So RTI is the process of using the data that you already have from your MTSS to identify a child with a learning disability. So the RTI part of it is special ed. The MTSS part of it is good instructional practice that's just part of core instructional practice. So the focus, I'm so glad the focus switched, and I'm not sure when it did, from RTI to MTSS. So now we've realized without a good MTSS, we can't do effective RTI decision making. So let's start focusing on MTSS. But I'm gonna come back to one more point because this does come from special ed. There's a definition of special ed, and it's never changed. And if you're a general educator, special educator, whatever, this is probably something you would know. The definition of special ed has always been individualized instruction, although the actual term is specialized, but that's been interpreted to mean individualized. Individualized instruction at no cost to the parents or guardians to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. Now, we do one aspect of this definition really well. I want to ask you, but you know, and we look at this whole definition: individualized instruction, no cost to parents or guardians, meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. The part of that we do best is at no cost. We don't really do individualized as well as we should, and I think we need to do a better job of addressing unique needs. So this is the very definition of special ed: individualized instruction to meet the unique needs of a kid. How do we know what the unique needs are? Well, through data. You can't do special education without data. You know, let me ask you this question. How can I do this? Give me I'll stop sharing my screen. You don't have to turn your camera on for this. So I can see everyone. Can I see everyone? Oh, maybe I can't. Can I switch the view to the gallery? Let's see. I can't. Oh, that's okay. All right, we'll do it this way.
You're in a webinar mode, so I don't think you can.
That's okay. Yep, that's okay. So in the chat, so just put in the chat. You see the emoji? Just give me a thumbs up emoji if you are special. Okay, put that. Just give me a thumbs up emoji if you're special. Now reshare my screen while people do that. So I have chat open. You see a couple coming in. Good. Looks like Ashley and good. Jesse, good. Val, Holly, good. Thumbs up from Kathy, looks like. If I seen your name right. Good, thank you. Okay, so I purposefully, Amy, thank you. I phrased that, Rebecca, thank you. I phrased it the way I did, which might have sounded kind of weird. Maybe some of you are catching on now. I asked how many of you are special, not how many of you teach special ed, how many of you are special. And I hope all of you say, oh, I'm special. I'm absolutely a special person, or a special teacher or special whatever. I hope all of you think that way. So the point in this is we talk so much about special ed, but I think if we're doing individualized instruction to meet the unique needs of a child, we are doing education that is special. And that's what I want the goal to be. I want to stop thinking of special ed and start thinking of education that is special. It's individualized through data and to meet the unique needs of a kid. So how do we do that? Well, systematically do it through a good MTSS. Now, I define MTSS, my colleagues and I defined it slightly differently than most. I would argue it's the systematic use of assessment data to efficiently allocate resources to enhance learning for all kids. It's the path to an education that is special. Get the data, use it systematically, use those data to allocate resources, help all kids. That's what we're talking about. Use that system to develop education, or at least implement education that is special. So step one in that process has to be talking about the purposes of assessment. Now, I know Holly at least hit this once in the first session. It may have been hit in the second one, but if it was, we're going to hit it in all three then, because I think this is extremely important. When we think of purposes of assessment, there are really four. I'm going to talk about three tonight. I'm going to talk about three, just for time's sake. So screening, of course, is looking to see which kids need help. It's as our little minor here is picking them all up, shaking it out, and see what falls through and what sticks in and what really matters, and identifying what they value, what they're looking for. Well, I use screening to try and identify, take all the kids and see which ones need help and which ones don't. And I'm trying to get down to the ones that I think need help. And that's the purpose of screening. Second, once the kid is identified as needing help, we have to figure out what help they need. So we dive in and do much more in-depth analysis to try and figure out what the kids actually need, like our little detective here. Okay, we need to know which kids we're focusing on. Now let's see what they need. And then lastly, of course, we monitor progress. And the example that Holly used is you go to the doctor, once a year at least, and all they do is take your vitals and just give you a checkup and say, yep, you're doing well. That's what we're talking about. Now, the thing is, though, that the assessment has to match the purpose for which we are using it. For example, let's talk about screening for a few minutes. This is one of my favorite studies I've ever done, and it's getting a lot of attention, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just talk about it for a few minutes. These are data from two types of measures. There's three measures up there. The map, measures of academic progress. The map for reading was our criteria. Okay, it's the NWA, the measures of academic progress. It's a good screener. I can make an argument it's not great for some ages and some grades, but we worked with kids here in second and third grade. And for second and third grade, it has really good accuracy. It's a good screener. Now, we're comparing it now to two different types of measures. So this one's oral reading fluency, and that's Ames-Webb. So it's Dibbles, Acadience, all of those. But in this particular example, it was Ames-Webb. And then we have the Fountas-Pinnell benchmark assessment system. If you're not familiar with the Fountas-Pinnell, it's basically an informal reading inventory, like the DRA, like the Jerry Johns basic reading inventory, all of those. You sit down with the kid, they read to you from passages that are at particular grades, and you keep going till you find one that represents the kid's instructional, independent, and frustration level. And then the idea is once you recognize their various levels, you put them in groups based on those levels and teach to that level. Now, so I do research at instructional level, like what represents an instructional level. So whenever something comes out that supposedly assesses an instructional level, I tend to look at it. Well, this came out. I'm sitting in my office one day, literally, in way back in Minnesota, and this thing comes out, and I'm looking at the manual, and like on page 10, it says you can use this to screen kids for reading problems, and it hits me. Oh, duh! They call it the benchmark assessment system. They're presenting it as a screener. So I keep reading, and I don't see anything in that entire book about screening, like nothing in there to support that you can make screening decisions, whatever. So I thought, you know what, let's study it. So we took about 900 kids, actually almost 1,000 here, and we gave them all the map, the Ames-Webb, and the Fountas-Pinnell. And what we found was that looking at the Ames-Webb data, among the 646 kids who did well on the map, 501 of them did well on Ames-Webb, which is 78%. So think of it like a grade. Okay, 78%. That's what? That's a C plus. C. That's passing. It's not great, but it's certainly passing. But then we look at the 322 kids who didn't do well on the map, and 276 of them also did not do well on Ames-Webb, which is 86%. Much better. What's that? A solid B, almost a B plus. So this test does a good job of identifying kids who need help. Now, we might occasionally identify a kid who needs help who didn't really need it, and that's okay. We can live with that. But we have to keep this number as small as possible. Ames-Webb, Dibbles, Acadience, they do that really well. But now look at the Fountas-Pinnell benchmark assessment system. Of the 556 kids who did well on the map, 367 of them did well on F&P, the BAS, which is 66%. D plus, I suppose passing, but not very good. And now look at the 290 kids who didn't do well on the map. Only 90 of them didn't do well on the F&P. Only 90, 31%. Quite literally, until recently, the lowest score I've ever seen for sensitivity to identify kids who are struggling readers. The lowest I've ever seen. Does a terrible job of identifying struggling readers. And I look at overall correct classification. Ames Web got it right 80% of the time. Okay, B minus, it's passing, it's fine. FMP got it right 54% of the time, which means you can buy this test for thousands of dollars. You can train all your teachers how to do it. You can take 20 or 30 minutes per kid, or just give each teacher a quarter, and they'll get it often. I find that alarming. This test was not designed to be a screener. I don't care what they say. It was designed to help drive instruction. It does that really bad too, but we'll talk about that later. It was not designed to be a screener. If we're using the data as a screener, we're using it for a purpose for which it wasn't developed, and you will almost always get high measurement error in that situation. So the first step into get into a good MTSS system is to get a good screener and database decision making, but to make sure it is actually a screener. So in the chat, I'm going to put a website. Oops, sorry. If you go to intensiveintervention.org and look at tools charts, and then look at academic screeners, it lists a whole bunch of them for reading and math and tells you if they do a good job of screening or not. So things like Ames Web, Dibbles, Acadians actually rate really well. Ames Web and Acadians and Dibbles are free. They seem to work pretty well as a screener. All a screener is designed to do is tell you which kids need help. So let's talk about STAR for a second. So STAR early literacy, which I guess I shouldn't talk about much in this state because it's the basis for our state assessment system. But STAR is a fine screener. It's a good measure. It's a screener. And teachers push back and say, well, those data don't really tell me anything about how to help kids learn how to read. Same thing maybe with Dibbles. And my response is, well, you know what? They're not supposed to. You're right. They have one job. And that one job is to tell you which kids need help. And that's it. Now, you can use those data diagnostically later, but you can't. But that one score, all it's designed to do is tell you which kids need help. Ames Web and Dibbles and Acadians do that quite well. Participant just doesn't. And it's super expensive too. So first task is get a good screener and use the data to determine which kids need help. Now, most approaches to screening have a nice, well-researched method to identify which kids need help. So, for example, Ames Web, I keep talking about Ames Web. Let's drop Ames Web. Dibbles and Acadians, because they're both free. Both have already, Acadians I love because Acadians did research on what would be a good criterion. Dibbles uses more of a norm referenced. But Acadians, boy, if you don't do well, if you're scoring the at-risk range on Acadians, you are likely to not do well on the state test, on the next state test. They reach those criteria through research. So just go with their risk, works pretty well. If for some reason you don't have that, you can pick a percentile rank, like the 25th or 40th percentile. But going with whatever risk recommend, getting Dibbles and Acadians, which are free, using their free norms, you can get a good screening just from those really pretty quickly. So that's step one. Then once you identify the kids through your screening, you got kids here who are doing well, kids who are even doing better than well. And then we've got the kids who need some help and the kids who need a lot of help, right? So we know we got these kids need a lot of help. So based on the data from the screener, we're going to do additional diagnostic data to help these kids. I would argue that even these kids should have some diagnostic data collected to see what they need. So I would suggest step one is screen, and then the kids who score low, to collect additional data for those kids, any kid who scores below the benchmark to see what type of intervention and how we should focus intervention efforts for those kids. And that's a diagnostic assessment, which is different than screen. By the way, STAR and MAP and others will tell you you can use their data for diagnostic decisions. I'll tell you that you can't. Here's why. STAR and MAP and other any computer generated assessment, reading assessment is almost always a computer adaptive test. So computer adaptive tests use item response theory to select items for you to take. So what that means is this. STAR gives you like, I don't know how many, let's say it gives you 5 subtests, and they're like phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary, literature, whatever that means, et cetera. And you're supposed to be able to look at those subtests and say, wow, my kid scored low on phonemic awareness. He needs phonemic awareness. But because they use IRT, there's a good chance that the kid got a score in that area without completing a single item. So those individual scores, the overall score is good. The overall reading quotient is good. That's reliable, it's solid. Those individual scores, those subtest scores, tend to be pretty unreliable for individual kids. I don't look at them for individual kids. They have one purpose, that's to create the total score. Now, if you're a classroom teacher and you look at your STAR data, for example, or MAP, and you say, wow, on average, my whole class scored low on phonemic awareness. I better do something about that. Great, that's great, because that's an average score, that's a group score. Those data are reliable enough if you're looking at it for a group. But if you're looking at it for an individual kid, those subtest scores don't really tell you much. All STAR, all MAP is designed to do is tell you can read, can't read. That's it. And if we try to interpret it more than that, we'll probably get measurement error. So now we've got our kids who need help. Let's look and see what type of help they need through diagnostic assessment. So let's continue picking on the Fontes Pinnell for a minute. Excuse me. I have no idea how many of your districts use this measure, but it's although this research is on F&P, the BAS, DRA, as I mentioned, Jerry Johns, basic reading inventory, qualitative reading inventory, almost all of those had these same difficulties. So I took these students, and this is from I honestly forget the grade, it was 2nd or 3rd grade. But I was talking to the teacher and discussing how I don't use the benchmark assessment system. And she was telling me it's so important because those data really help you individualize instruction. So she pulled up her data and showed it to me. These are her data. And all I did was grab the middle section. That's all I did. I did not manipulate these data in any way. I just grabbed the middle section. So these are all the kids. I think this was not just her classroom. This is her and her partner teachers. So 2 classrooms. These kids were all the Gs. So Fontes Pinnell gives you a level, an A, B, C, etc., up to a G. I mean, up to whatever. But these were kids who were all Gs. So what she was doing is they were taking these kids who were all Gs, grouping them into small groups and running small group instruction and intervention. So, okay, well, let's look at pick any 2 kids up here. So I got the map and the percentile rank. Okay, so any kid below the 25th percentile certainly needs support. That's a low score. This is their Dibble's reading fluency, and this is their accuracy, which I'll talk about more later. So pick a kid, like I said, let's start with the highest one. This kid, 73rd percentile for MAP, 80 words a minute, 98% correct. Okay, look at the kid next to him, either direction. 17th percentile for MAP, 58 words a minute, 89% correct. These 2 kids do not have the same reading needs. They just don't. Again, pick any 2. I'm picking them fairly close, but let's even, even this kid, 6th percentile, 36 words a minute, 86% correct, 1st, 30th, 77th. Their needs are probably not the same. And then compare that to this kid, 19th percentile, 70 words a minute, 100% of the words read correctly. These kids have different reading needs, but they're all a G. Fontes Pinnell, DRA, any leveling system does not give you the diagnostic data you need to individualize instruction or intervention. They just don't break reading down enough to do that. Now, looking at these data together gives me a pretty good indication of what's going on, but I could get the same decision by dropping this out. And this is the most expensive test on this page by far. A great study by Courtney Barrett just came out Courtney Barrett and colleagues, and they found that on average, the Fontes Pinnell cost $130 per kid to administer, and Dibble's cost, this is from memory, so it might be wrong, cost around $20 per kid. No, I'm sorry, $30 per kid. So $30 per kid versus $130 per kid, and you get better data. That's an easy decision. So one more point to make about Fontes Pinnell and about any leveling system is don't forget, we'll come back to this in a few minutes, there's always error in your data. There's never been a measurement system yet that had error-free data. The Fontes Pinel and the DRA, et cetera, all have error in their score. So what that means is this kid scores of an F is really somewhere between a D and an H. Okay, so we give this kid this test 100 times, they're going to score between D and H 95% of them. They just happen to score an F that day. And the standard error of measure is something I computed based on data that the F&P provided. So if a kid gets an F, tomorrow it could be an E, then a G, then an H, then a D. You know, there's all within the standard error of measure. So it becomes a problem that if your kid's an F and you assume that he can't read an H book, and he probably could because those are the same score. So let's say the kid goes from F to it at one day, and then the next month we assess him again. He goes to a J. Like, oh my gosh, that's great! Look at this great growth. Well, J has a standard error of measure too, and J, that score is probably somewhere between H and L. So because these two ranges overlap, the score of an F to a J, psychometrically, those two scores are the same. A growth from F to J does not represent growth. It represents measurement error, probably. It does not represent real student growth. Now, if the kid goes from F to I don't know, W, we'll talk. But an F to a J, a nice, by the way, 1, 2, 3, 4-point jump. Ooh, that's pretty awesome. No, psychometrically, that's the same score. So don't get too excited about the scores. Don't get too excited about the scores. What I think really helps me when thinking diagnostically, and by the way, I do reading intervention work. If someone calls me up, a school calls me up and says, can you help me with this kid? I'll go there, and the very first thing I will do is have that kid read to me from a grade level text. That'll be my step number one. So I recognize the value in watching kids read and getting a score from that, et cetera. But if you look at this score here, there's too much error in that score to really make a meaningful decision. That's why I don't think it works very well diagnostically. So what do we do diagnostically instead? Well, we're going to start with some bigger buckets and work our way down. The method I'm going to show you in a second breaks it down a little bit more than this, but generally speaking, it's this idea. I want to find the most fundamental skill in which a kid struggles. So if a kid has low comprehension, well, then look at, I group comprehension and vocabulary together. The reason being is it's tough to pull those two things apart, both in measurement and in intervention. So I tend to group those two things together. So if we're seeing some indication that they're low in this area, then I look at fluency. Okay, low reading fluency, I'll look at phonics. Low phonics, I'll look at phonemic awareness. So for example, if a kid has low reading fluency but good phonics, that means reading fluency is the most fundamental skill in which they struggle. That'll be my target. If a kid has low fluency, low phonics, and I look at phonemic awareness, low fluency, low phonics, good phonemic awareness, we know phonics is our measure, okay? Is our target, I'm sorry. Now, when I say target, I mean not exclusively, but it's the focus. I'll come back to that in a second. So presented in a more, an easier way to follow, a nice flow chart, which I did not create. This is part of the UFLI materials. So the first thing we'll probably look at is text level automaticity. Why do I have a kid read to me? Step number one, that's what I'm assessing. Looking at the whole text, does the kid read it? Do they read it with some level of automaticity? And generally speaking, I just get their score, their oral reading fluency score, and compare it to the norm. Are they in the risk range or not? If they're not in the risk range, then we know our focus is language comprehension. If they are in the risk range on text level reading automaticity, then I'll look at word level automaticity. So when I break it down to just isolated words, etc., can they still read, or can they read those? Or is that skill now automatic? If it's good, well, then I know I go back up to text level automaticity. So then I work on text level fluency, etc. If word level automaticity is low, then I look at decoding accuracy. I think accuracy data, I'll come back to this in a few minutes. I think accuracy data are so important. If they can't, I want to look at the percentage of words they read correctly. I want to look at the percentage of words they can decode correctly. If that's good, then we know word level automaticity is our goal, is our instructional goal. If that's low, then we look at phonemic awareness. We go all the way back to basic phonemic awareness and we assess that. If phonemic awareness is strong, then we focus on increasing their decoding accuracy. And if their phonemic awareness isn't, then of course we intervene for phonemic awareness. Now, the good news is I'll show you some measures of all of these, but we want to keep working backward until we find the most fundamental skill in which the kid struggles. Keep digging, keep searching until you find the source of the problem. Then you focus your intervention efforts there. Now, again, I want to be really careful. I say focus. If I'm doing, decoding accuracy, absolutely, we're going to have the kid read decodable text. I'll probably start with a quick phonemic awareness warm-up. Absolutely. But the reason I started doing research on this many years ago was when I was living in Minnesota. A lot of schools were near me, they loved Read Naturally. Read Naturally was I think the original was originally published out of Minnesota, and so we loved it in Minnesota. And so a lot of schools I worked with, that was their tier 2 intervention. Kid couldn't read, scored below whatever, they got Read Naturally. Now, if you're not familiar with Read Naturally, it's a fine tool. Especially at the time, it's a reading fluency intervention. It's designed to help that text level automaticity. So if your kid needs that, it's a great thing to use. It's one of the best things you can use. But if the kid struggles with basic decoding, Read Naturally was not the answer. You got to hit that. And when I started doing research in that, and I had so I started doing research in that in 15 years ago, if not longer, and started to see that, oh, you know what, when you match the intervention better to the kid's needs, you get better results. And I started showing these data to teachers, and it was like, oh, yeah, duh. But again, target, not exclusionary. So don't hear me say, if your kid needs decoding, just do decoding. Absolutely. But what I'm saying is this: if it's a 30-minute intervention block, 20 minutes of it better be decoding. We might do 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute of a warm-up. We might do some connected text reading at the end. You might even have time for a reading game as a reinforcement. Absolutely. But they're going to get decoding if that's what they need. That's the part that we missed for such a long time. And I would argue diagnostically that accuracy data are so important. Now, I'm not going to waste time to talk about the research behind it, but basically what we found is kids reading less than 93% of the words, that means they're probably struggling to break the code. Older kids, it goes up. Like middle school, even 5th grade, probably 95%. So let's look at some data. Again, what I showed you earlier. So many schools do this. Talking about screening again, I finished a study, Amanda Vanderheed and myself from West Bonifay. I think it came out around 2018. We looked at screening, how often we screen. And we found anywhere from 1 screener each benchmark just in reading to 9. We saw schools doing 9 different types of screening 3 times a year. And I think we spend way too much time and too much money screening. I wouldn't even probably do this, what I'm showing you here. In this school, every kid got MAP, every kid got CBM or DIBELS. In this state, we have STAR. STAR can replace MAP, and so any kid who scores low, I would certainly give those kids DIBELS. I don't think you have to give DIBELS because we have STAR, FAST, I should call it FAST, because we have FAST here in this state. That functions pretty well, especially 2nd through 5th grade. Kindergarten and 1st grade, I'm probably going to rely more on DIBELS than FAST. But sure, FAST measuring in 2nd through 5th grade, pretty good place to start. Kids who score low, give those kids DIBELS. If you want to give DIBELS to all your kids, you certainly can, but you certainly want to give it to the kids who score low on this particular measure. So I had a bunch of kids here who scored low on MAP. Now MAP and STAR/FAST, 2nd through 5th grade, those are basically measures of comprehension. They're very comprehension loaded. Now there's more to it, but for the most part, 2nd through 5th grade, those are absolutely comprehension loaded. It's mostly comprehension vocabulary. So if we look at these kids who scored low on the MAP, and I don't know, you get an IRT score, RIT score, you get a RIT score. I know what that means, but I don't know what it means. Like if someone says to me, well, their RIT's 210, I have no idea what that means. So if it's in the red, all that means is these were kids who scored below the criterion for that season for that measure. So for MAP in the fall, it looks like it was a 212 or higher well, say it this way, 211 or lower to be in the risk range. So all these kids were in the risk range, these kids aren't, okay? Then we look at the CBM data. So these kids are all low in comprehension, probably. These kids are probably, looking at the DIBELS data, all low in reading fluency because they're below the benchmark. But we're not done. So I've got a couple kids up there. This kid was low comprehension, but good fluency. So that kid probably needs a little fluency building. And we see a couple kids who are good comprehension, low fluency. So I would probably argue some fluency building for those kids as well. But now let's look at the accuracy data. This is just percentage of words read correctly. So I take the number of words read correct. So 88 words read correctly, 4 errors. So 92 words total, 88 plus 4. 88 divided by 92 is 95%. Ames Web, DIBELS, Cadence, they give the percentage to you. It's great. Let's look at this. This is a good example. So this kid, student number 606. Student number 606 has a MAP score that's in the at-risk range, a fluency score that's in the at-risk range, and their accuracy that is low. That means low comprehension, low fluency, low word level accuracy, which is a good proxy for basic decoding. This kid, we really got to focus on decoding. Now compare that kid to student number 620, low comprehension, low fluency, but boy, pretty good accuracy there. So that kid, we're going to focus on fluency. Now again, focus on fluency. It doesn't mean exclusively. We'll probably do a decoding review, at least a decoding review for a few minutes for this kid. At the end, we'll certainly ask him comprehension questions, but man, we're going to have fluency for this kid who needs the fluency building. By the way, you notice this kid's in red? The closer to the criterion, the less confidence I have in the decision. So because he was right there, I said, you know what? Let's walk through him a little further, which I'll show you what we did for him in just a minute. But let's just get a little more data for this kid to make sure he doesn't have a basic decoding issue, because he might. Just because he scored at the cut point doesn't mean he's clear, right? So closer to the criterion, the less confidence I have in the decision. Okay. So if I were to ask you to pick another kid up there, this kid, low comprehension, low fluency, good accuracy, fluency building is probably the kid's target. And I always want to say probably, because I said earlier, every measure has measurement error. I'm looking at 3 measures here. So there's error in this decision. I don't know how much, but there's error in this decision. So it could be wrong, but there's a good chance this kid needs decoding, for example, this kid too. And there's a good chance this kid needs fluency building. Now, we're still probably not done. I'm going to take, I mentioned earlier, find the most fundamental skill in which the kid struggles. Now, I don't remember what grade this is, to be honest. It looks like these are pretty good fluency scores. This must be at least 3rd grade. 3rd grade and above, I don't systematically look at phonemic awareness. The number of kids who have low phonemic awareness, even among struggling readers, in 3rd grade and above is almost 0. I have a study that's under review right now, so it's not published, hasn't gone through peer review yet, but we found among 2nd and 3rd graders who were struggling readers, identified as a struggling reader through some screener, they all demonstrated good phonemic awareness, at least acceptable. Kindergarten, no. If the kids were identified as a struggling reader with some external measure in kindergarten, man, they all lacked phonemic awareness. But by 2nd and 3rd grade, no, what they lacked was decoding. And when you looked at the number of kids who were low in phonemic awareness in 2nd and 3rd graders who were struggling readers, it was very low. And when you looked at correlations with reading in 2nd and 3rd grade, struggling readers, the phonemic awareness score literally 0, accounted for zero variance literally in their reading score. Whereas decoding accounted for like 60%. It was crazy how high it was. If the kid's not reading in 2nd grade and above, well, 3rd grade. If the kid's not reading 3rd grade and above, it's a decoding issue almost every single time. Well, okay, let me back it up one more time. 3rd through like 6th grade, it's a decoding issue almost every single time. It's kindergarten, 1st grade might be phonemic awareness. So if I've got a kid in 2nd grade and they look like this kid here, low comprehension, low fluency, and low accuracy, second grade, kindergarten, I'll assess their phonemic awareness further. So there's several ways to assess phonemic awareness. This is a measure I use that I helped create. It's a phonemic awareness inventory. All I want to point out to you is if you Google, I'll show you one in a minute, but if you Google free phonemic awareness measures, you'll find some. Just make sure they measure these, at least these three things. Can a kid isolate sounds? Can a kid segment sounds? And can the kid blend sounds? That's it. Anything beyond that, I don't think it's fine to include, sure, but I don't think those data really help you from a diagnostic perspective. What really helps is isolating, blending, and segmenting. Oh, sure, we measure manipulation, that's fine, but I might, if a kid's struggling with phonemic awareness, it's probably going to be one of these three. But there are other free ones out there as well. I actually went to Really Great Reading, their website, and you can see I put that copyright in here on purpose, and I also I screenshot just a couple sections of it, so you didn't get the whole thing. It's free. You go to their website and just sign up, and they email it to you for free. Now I did that, so I'm sure I'm on some listserv now, and I'll get advertisements, but that's okay. I got this free, seemingly nice phonemic awareness screener measure, and it measures. You can see it measures matching and identifying sounds, then blending them, and then segmenting them. It probably does a little more than I think I need. I don't need the level of precision it gets to. And it measures skills I don't think we really need, but it measures the things I think we do need. Isolating, blending, and segmenting sounds. And it's free. And there are lots of them. So if you see a kid who's in second grade and not doing well in reading, I would certainly use that for these particular kids. Now, I will give one last nuanced conversation about the phonemic awareness issue, which is I have one criterion. If a kid is third grade and above, I will screen their phonemic awareness if they meet this one scientific criterion. You ready? It's really scientific. If they're really, really low. That's it. That's all I got. So if I've got a kid in fourth grade who's reading 15 words a minute, 50% correct, and first percentile for MAP, and I'm not making those numbers up. I am, but I've seen kids like that. You know what? I'll pull that fourth grader and do a quick phonemic awareness measure. He might have an issue with it, but only if they're really, really low. And that's my sign. What is really, really low? I don't know. You decide. But that's my scientific criterion. And the scientific part is sarcastic. But that's my criterion. If the kid's really, really low in older grades, but second grade, if I got a kid who's got low accuracy, I'll probably just do a phonemic awareness measure with that kid. Certainly kindergarten and first grade, I do it much more frequently. So also, these kids who are low in three areas, I want to look at their decoding. I need to get more information about their decoding areas. So for those kids, I'm going to pull them and do a decoding inventory. So here's the quick phonics screener. I didn't give you that because I just learned today, quite literally, it's not free. I always thought it was free. I think Jan Hasbrook wrote it. I think I owe her at least a dinner because I've used it I don't know how many times. And I went to download it today because I couldn't find it on my hard drive. And Googled it and found out, no, you're supposed to pay for it. Didn't know that. So so it's not free, but it's available. Now it's also very cheap, but it measures letter sounds. It doesn't, it probably doesn't break it down enough for me, but it's a pretty good start. It's a pretty good start. So it's got a nice little measure that measures these areas for individual kids. And now you can start to see, okay, how far back do I go? Do I have to go all the way back to basic letter sounds? Do I have to go back to CVCC? Where are we in this sequence? Core Phonics has a nice one. Core Phonics, again, not free. If you Google them, though, the good news about phonics and phonemic awareness is they're both so easy to measure that it's pretty easy to get a reliable score, except first grade. I don't know how many of you are first grade teachers out there, but I honestly think there's a special place in heaven for first grade teachers because there's always what we call the first grade problem. Like we'll see estimates of reliability. In kindergarten, it'll be really good. In second grade, really good. Third grade, really good. First grade, terrible. It's not that the measures are unreliable in first grade, it's that the kids are. So the first grade problem. But for the most part, getting a reliable measure of decoding is not difficult. So thank you again for clarifying, Jesse. It's not free. It's a great book. You can get it online. It's cheap, but it's not free. Thank you. But here's the breakdown that Foundations has used. the UFLI Foundation. So if they're, and the reason I'm showing you this is to get a sense of this. This is what I'm talking about, diagnostic. So I assess these kids, and let's say I work my way back, and I have some kids who need work in long vowel sounds. They might do poorly in all of these, but they'll do well in these. So low vowel sounds is where we need to start with them. So for them, we start with lesson 54 in foundations. Or whereas this kid, they do well on all of these, but they start to do poorly on R-controlled vowels. So for those kids, we're going to go to lesson number 77 as our instructional approach. That's I'm talking about more diagnostic data. So once we get past these big buckets, then we dive in to see, do they need blending or segmenting for phonemic awareness? Or are we talking about short vowel sounds versus consonant blends, et cetera? We get to that level of specificity. So let's put this all together. Some second graders, this district used STAR. And what they did here is they took the kids, and if it's a red score, that means that was the lowest thing they did, the most fundamental skill in which they scored low. Okay, so for example, look at these kids right here. They scored at the 15th, 17th, and 19th percentile on STAR, on FAST. So, but their fluency was good. So for these kids, that was their lowest target. Now look at these three kids. Here, this kid was 11th percentile, I'm sorry, first percentile, 11th percentile. These kids are all first percentile, 24th, 29th, but they also had low fluency scores. So the red represents the lowest one. So for these kids, because they had low comprehension, low fluency, but then their accuracy was good, we just went with fluency. For those kids, we're going to do fluency building, repeated reading type stuff for those kids. But now these kids who are low comprehension, low fluency, and also low accuracy, okay, for those kids, let's dive in. That's our trigger that we need to look more at decoding. So then we gave them a decoding measure that is letter sound correspondence, short vowel, CVC, digraphs, blends, etc. And we found was, again, red means the lowest one. So we got a couple of kids here who don't have basic letter sound correspondence in second grade. I should point out, these are real live data. They're not live, I guess, but they're real data from actual second graders. And so we did find second graders who, not in special ed, nothing like that, who didn't have basic letter sound correspondence. So these three kids didn't. Now this kid did, and these kids passed the letter sound correspondence as well. So we kept going for them. This kid did not do well in short vowel CVC. These kids did fine. So we kept going for these kids. These kids needed support with digraphs, and then we're done with them. These kids, digraphs look good, so we're all the way back to blends. And so these kids need blends. So what I'm now going to do is I'm probably going to take maybe these four kids right here, put them together in one group, and focus my instruction on them, on those skills. I think these skills are probably close enough that you can put them together. But if you have, because I only have four kids, I'm just, if you can have each column here be its own group, great. But if you can't, it's okay to group a couple. I think these two are probably close enough. I think these two are probably close enough too to group them together, probably. Again, if you have enough kids to make it work, great. But if not, you can probably group them. So my grade level team, my PLC, we've taught PLCs how to do this. We'll sit down, look at their screening data, decide what kids need additional diagnostic data, additional phonemic awareness or decoding, assess them, and target the intervention or small group instruction based on those data. It's a pretty simple process. It's not difficult to do, but you have to know how to do it. You have to know the steps. And the good news is it works. I'll show you one study. I've got a couple of them. Oh, this is the one I laugh about because people ask me about LLI quite a bit. If you're not familiar with it, leveled literacy intervention is the Fontes and Pinnell intervention. It's the intervention part of F&P. And I say, my joke is I love LLI because I use it as my control group because it makes the intervention I'm studying look even better. And that's what we saw here. So we have three groups here. Okay, we have the red here is kids that we targeted intervention, as I just showed you. Grouped them to get phonics, as I just showed you, okay? These were good readers. These were kids that at the beginning of the year, good readers, got no additional support. And these were kids that were struggling readers who got LLI, level literacy intervention. This is the average growth per week. So the kids who got targeted grew at a rate that was significantly better in second and third grade than the kids who got LLI. They also grew at a rate that was larger than, although not significant, in second grade, wasn't third, than the good readers. So for the kids that got a targeted intervention, the difference between good reader and struggling reader got smaller. Now, but look at LLI. It grew at a rate, those kids grew at a rate that was less than the good readers. So for them, the gap between good reader and struggling reader got bigger. Targeting it was more effective. We've done this with high school kids, the same exact study. We've done this with, we just have it, it's coming out in Preventing School Failure, where we worked with the school district to implement this, and they already had it in place. I don't want to tell you which district it was, so I can't say much, but they already had a lot of stuff in place. We came in, all we did was come in, help them think through what this would look like, and then measure fidelity. Did they actually do it? So here the three groups were kids that got targeted, kids that got any intervention off the shelf. There was no control over what intervention they picked, and good readers, and we saw the same pattern. There was a significant difference here and here, second and third grade, but not between here and here, but also between here and here. Okay. So targeted intervention was more effective. Okay, so we got 20 minutes left tops. I want to talk about progress monitoring. I'm hoping you'll have opportunity to throw chat in or questions. If there are any questions about what we've talked about so far, please don't hesitate to throw it in the Q&A or in chat. Before I start talking about monitoring student progress, there's one more decision we have to talk about. So I'll start talking, but feel free to throw in any questions in chat or Q&A. All right. So the last thing is we got we know which kids need help. We've got diagnostic data to see what help they need. Let's now implement those interventions and see, are they making adequate progress? How do we see if they're making adequate progress? Through progress monitoring. Take those kids who identified as low, get targeted intervention, diagnostic, and monitor progress. Now we know how to do that. We're pretty good at that. We collect data once a week, we'll do Dibbles once a week or Ames Web or something like that, Acadience once a week. And we say, yeah, okay. But my question's always been, that's the easy part. Is this kid doing well? Yeah, how about this kid? What does good growth look like? Well, that depends. That's always the researcher's response to every question. Well, it depends. So we always give these nuanced answers, but it does depend because remember, every measure in the world has error. These have error. We know that error is the difference between true score and observed score. Any one CBMR, so Dibbles, oral reading fluency. By the way, Dibbles calls oral reading fluency DORF. That is probably the worst name in the history of measurement. DORF. I can't even say it with a straight face. DORF. So anyway, the DORF has about 10 to 15 points of a standard error of measure. So a kid's score of 45 is probably somewhere between like 30 to 60. Well, that's a bit high. Let me show you the actual data. This is a study by Ted Christ in 2007. It needs to be updated, but there's lots of information up there. Just kind of look at these middle columns. Middle, typical, okay? So first through fifth grade. So oral reading fluency, standard error of measure, has a standard error of measure in third grade of about plus or minus 10 or 11. Okay? In fourth grade, about the same thing. So about 10 or 11, 8 to 12. So the oral reading fluency, a DORF score of 70, is really somewhere between a 60 and an 80. Okay, keep in mind. Oh, thank you. Dibbles 8 no longer uses DORF. They call it ORF. I'm so glad to learn that, Mary Jo. Thank you, because I don't have to say DORF anymore. Acadians, no, he doesn't call it that either. Great. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you. So now if I make fun of DORF, it's historical because it's still pretty funny. But anyway, so oral reading fluency, be it Acadience or Dibbles or whatever, don't get to, again, that one score can have a standard error of measure pretty big. So if it's a 60, it's probably somewhere between a 50 and a 70. So don't get too hung up on this. So I see, sometimes you see bounce in the data. Don't worry about that. You're going to see a standard error of measure for these individual data points. What I'm worried about is what are the trend of the data. That's all I care about. Now, trend is it going up or down? And what's the slope of that trend line? I'll show you a way to do this in the end. But I want to make one more point about that. Just like all these individual data points have error, you look at this and you think, wow, you know what, that kid's doing pretty well. That's a pretty good trend going up. But this trend line has error too. And going back to Ted Chris work, again, needs to be replicated. But again, look at this middle line. So this right here is a slope of 2.5. Okay. So what that means is on average, this kid's going up 2.5 words per minute per week. Okay. That's what that means, 2.5. So 2.5 is great. Let's say after, how many data points were there? 5. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, 5. I'm a reading guy, not a math guy. So 5 data points, so 5 weeks. So we just look at the middle. This is weeks of progress monitoring. So after 5 weeks, the standard error of measure of that 2.5 is 2.21. What does that mean? Well, that means this 2.5 could be this, or it could be that. These are psychometrically equivalent. You look at, if the data look like this, you think, wow, this kid's doing great. If the data look like this, you would think, that's not so good. So what Ted had done was showed us that, well, I'll come back to that, showed us that, darn it, that we really got to look at the amount of data we collect. And until we get enough data, we don't really have a reliable decision. And so Ted looked at this and said, you know what, it's going to take at least 10 data points to have a reliable decision. If you're using optimal conditions, which I'm not even sure what that means, it would take less, but from the typical condition is, you need about 10, 12 weeks worth of data. So I don't make a decision about changing an intervention, in other words, going from tier 2 to tier 3, until I have at least 10 data points. And people ask me all the time, how long should you give an intervention to run? It's not really about how long does it take for the intervention to be effective. It's how long does it take to get enough data to make a decision. I need 10 data points usually to have a reliable decision. Now, after 4 data points, you might say, wow, this isn't working very well. Let's try something different. Well, you can certainly maybe, add something to the intervention or build an incentive, or heck, even change the focus of the intervention. But I'm not changing the tier, going from tier 2 to tier 3 till I have 10 data points. I'll come back to that in a few minutes as well. So what's nice is all you have to do is get your data look like this. So here we have 18 data points. Looks like, here it's a bunch of data there. So we've got certainly reliable data. And in here, we look at the trend line, and this is the goal line. So this is the good reader was here when they started, and after X number of weeks would be here. All we want to do is to see, does this line make this gap get smaller? That's what we want to see. The gap was big here. You know what? It's going down. Good. That's what we want to see. That's an effective intervention. From an MTSS perspective, and I'm sorry, from an RTI perspective, although MTSS as well, you want to at least see this. The good reader started here, tier 1 reader, whatever you want to call it, and now they're here. Your kid started here, and at that same time period, if they continue, they'll be here. So the gap didn't get smaller, but didn't get bigger either. From identifying a learning disability perspective, this is at least what you want to see. What you don't want to see is this, the gap getting bigger. In an RTI world, this would be a learning disability. But we're not talking about RTI, we're talking about MTSS. So from MTSS, I want to see this, at least this. Now, the good news is that these graphs, if you want to do this, many data management systems do that for you. If you don't, go to this website, put your data in, and it makes a graph for you. It's really pretty simple. I would argue it's faster to use Excel to do this and just to compute slope and but for time's sake and for mental exhaustion's sake, I don't want to cover that today. If you're interested in doing that, so in other words, I get something that looks like this. I get a numeric value for slope. And I know in 2nd grade, our criteria are 42 words a minute in the fall, 73 in the winter, 90 in the spring. Those data represent a slope of 1.59. So I want my kids to be at least 1.59 words per minute per week. Now, we don't need every reading teacher in the world to know how to do this. We need maybe one or two people in the whole school who know how to do this. So if you want to be that 1 or 2 person and you want to learn how to do this, email me. I'll be thrilled to walk you through this. But for now, and this is just done in Excel, super easy. But for now, just think in terms of this, right? This is what you want. You could get a graph to show it to you pretty easily. Well, another advantage of slope is that you can just sort it. So our criterion here, the good readers progressed 1.72 words per minute per week. So we want our kids to at least be that. So all these kids at a grade level team meeting, we hardly talk about these kids. We just say, you know what? They're doing well. We'll spend most of our time talking about these kids. And we can do that in a quick glancing of the data. These kids are doing really well. These kids aren't there yet. Okay. Now, one more point to make, and that's this. You know, I can't tell how many times I've shown teachers this, and the response has been, that's not what I'm seeing in the classroom, be it this or this. You know, I see kids, wow, the kid's doing great. And the teacher's like, really? Or the kid's not doing well. And the teacher's like, you're kidding me. During the intervention, they're doing fantastically. Well, I had an aha moment back in Minnesota again, that Read Naturally group. I was going out to a school once a month, a K2 building, and was meeting with other teachers to look at their data and kind of think through what to do. It was really fun. Well, the special ed teacher found out we were doing this, and the special ed teacher went, can I be part of these conversations? And the principal and I are like, oh my gosh, yes, we're sorry, please, yes. So the special ed teacher came to the first meeting, and she had graphs of all of her kids. Now, all of our kids were in second grade, because back in the old discrepancy model days, it was almost impossible to identify a child with a learning disability until second grade. So almost all of our kids were in second grade. And she was doing a decoding intervention, monitoring progress with DIBBLs, and they weren't doing very well. And so she said to me, okay, Dr. Burns, I'm doing the decoding intervention with all these kids. And by the way, it's the decoding intervention you told me about, which is true, I did. And they're not doing well. What do I do? So, okay, let's think about this for a second. You're intervening for decoding, which is probably good. These kids are in second grade. That's probably a good thing to be focusing on. But you're monitoring progress with reading fluency. Why? Well, because reading fluency is a general outcome measure. It's designed to do one thing: getting better at reading or not. It's not designed to tell you in what skills are you getting better. So I said, just for the heck of it, because you're intervening for decoding, try monitoring progress with decoding and see what happens. And so she did. She started doing nonsense word fluency too. And sure enough, the kids look great. The reason we see a mismatch between the data and what we see in the classroom is because we're intervening or teaching one thing and assessing another. Look at this kid here. This kid, general outcome measure, reading fluency, grade level CBMR, grade level ORF, DIBBLs, or Acadians, not doing great. Oh, a couple of shining moments every now and then. I'm not sure what the heck happened here, week 3 to week 4, but not doing very well. Going up and not doing as much as we'd like. But then you look at their skill data, which in this case was decoding, and the kid's doing great. So we need to collect 2 types of data. I want to collect a general outcome measure, grade level DIBBLs, grade level Acadians, and I want to measure the skill in which we're intervening. I'm going to measure both. Now, if the intervention is not working well, those skill data can really help you understand what's going on. Let me come back to this for later. So, and come back to this. Let me show you this first, okay? So these are the spelling, these are sample spelling data from foundations. So foundations, again, Val and Holly, jump in at any point in time I say something needs correcting. You cover 2 concepts a week and then do their spelling assessment. The spelling assessment, which assesses the 2 concepts, are invaluable data. What those will tell you is the kid learning the skill you're teaching it. So these kids down here, they got a 5. You know what? They got it. Good, great. They've mastered those, maybe mastered is strong, but they've certainly demonstrated proficiency in the skills that were taught that week, or that's this one skill, this one concept. Whereas these kids who got a 4, well, they're getting it, they're getting there, but we're still going to reinforce that a little bit more for a couple of days. These kids are not getting it, so we need to do some reteaching, some more dosage there. And these kids did really low, so we need to spend quite a bit of time reteaching that. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about skill data. Those are wonderful data to have. So if a teacher says to me, well, I'm using UFLI foundations and I'm monitoring progress this way, and it's our MTSS system. How do I use these data to determine who goes from tier 2 to tier 3? I would argue you don't. You use GOM data, general outcome measure data, Dibble's oral reading fluency. But at the same time, if someone says, wow, oral reading fluency looks like the kid's not doing well, we're going to move right to tier 2, right from tier 2 to tier 3. My first question will be, show me your skill data. These will help you really understand why those scores aren't going up if it's in the general outcome measure. So I would argue that you have to have both a general outcome measure, which is just designed to say, is the kid getting better in reading, and a skill measure. The spelling measures that Foundations uses, almost said Foundations, that Foundations uses is a wonderful, UFLI Foundations is a wonderful indicator of how well they're learning the skill. And I think those are invaluable data, both from instructional and an MTSS perspective. So if you don't have Foundations or something, you don't have skill measures, well, there's things you can use. If you can use more general measures. I love the spelling ones from UFLI Foundations because they're specific downright to the concept. That's amazing. But if you don't have that, well, there are other things you can use. Phonemic awareness, you can monitor progress. I'm sorry, so let me be more clear. If you're intervening in phonemic awareness, you can use phoneme segmentation fluency, first sound fluency, phoneme, any phoneme-based assessment to monitor progress on a regular basis. If you're focusing on decoding, you can use nonsense word fluency or word list fluencies. Those are nice indicators of decoding. Now, there's a big push in monitoring progress, the debates about should you monitor progress on grade level or instructional level. Depends, as always. My answer is depends. Well, it depends on the decision. Assessment is never evaluated independent of the decision being made. So if someone says to me, well, is this a good measure? My response is, for what decision? So if you're going to make a resource allocation decision, an MTSS decision, moving from tier 2 to tier 3 to special ed or something, those have to be grade level oral reading fluency probes. Why? Because we have well-established decision-making rules, we have validated outcomes, and we have reliable systems, reliable data. If you're using the data for some other decision, you can use instructional level for that. So why? Because again, if a kid's in 5th grade and we're monitoring progress with a 2nd grade reading fluency, what's enough growth for that? We don't know. Are those reliable data? We don't know. So if you're making a resource allocation decision, tier 2 to tier 3 to special ed, for example, gotta have grade level because we know what to do with those. But if you're using it as a skill measure or some other thing, then instructional level is fine. So if I'm monitoring progress, intervening, my target is fluency, I'll do a grade level oral reading fluency once a week, and I'll do an instructional level oral reading fluency once a week, or at least every other week. Yeah, good. Oh, I know what to say. So I'm not sure what Dibble's and Acadience recommends anymore, but when you're doing the screening, you do 3 and take the median. But when you're monitoring progress, you can just do 1. So I'm talking about 1 minute a week. That's it. These are quick. And then 1 minute a week per kid. And then lastly, if you're really interested in monitoring progress for comprehension, which someday someone's going to invent a really nice comprehension tool to monitor progress. I hope it's me because that person will be rich. Easy CBM has a progress monitoring assessment that looks at comprehension. Star Reading can do that as well, as can MAP, but you can't do it very often. Monthly at the most, maybe every 3 weeks. You just don't see growth fast enough in comprehension to monitor progress more frequently than that. So. But then once you get the data, and now again, let's look at those same kids. Remember I said these kids here below 1.72 weren't doing well? Well, this kid's doing pretty well learning the skill, as is this kid and this kid and this kid. I basically got 1, 2, 3 or 4 kids that we need to talk about and figure out how to help them. Skill data are and I'm not suggesting you don't have to compute slope for the spelling measures. That's not what I mean. But look at the spelling measures and say every week he's getting a 4 or 5. He's learning the skill. Those are really valuable data. So once you get these data, then you've got 4 decisions. Oh, that's not true. You got 1 decision, but 4 possibilities. The first one is the intervention is effective and successful. So effective means going up, kids getting better. Successful means now a good reader, not proficiency. Okay, so going up and successful means they made great progress and now they're scoring in the proficient range, or at least the not at risk range. So if your data are suggest, and this is done with at least 10 weeks worth of data, I'm sorry, 10 data points. I'm not going to dismiss a kid from intervention or go up from tier 3 to tier 2 or something until I have reliable data. So 10 weeks, 10 data points, probably 10 weeks. If the intervention is effective and successful, what do? Well, if your data say the kid went up and now he's a proficient reader, you celebrate. Good. You write a transition plan for that kid, dismiss them from intervention, monitor progress like once a week, once a month or something, just to make sure, just keep an eye on, write a transition plan. The transition plan might be taking what you did in intervention and doing it a little less frequently. Maybe you start working with a kid 4 times a week, once or twice a week, we'll check in on this. What if the intervention's effective but not successful? So in other words, he's doing great, still going up, just not where he needed to be yet. Well, for that kid, we're gonna keep doing what we're doing, right? Stay there. There are 2 times when we'll make a change. One is the intervention isn't working, intervention didn't work. Okay, so both of these represent a time for change. Intervention isn't working means you make a change within the tier. Intervention didn't work means you make a change to the tier. There's one difference between these two, and that is simply the amount of data. In this one, it's not going like we want it to, but we only have 4 or 5 data points. So there we'll make a change within the tier. We might, as I mentioned, add incentive. We might focus more on decoding. We might focus more on fluency. We might, whatever. We might do it more. We might do, add more dosage. There's lots of possibilities there. This one, intervention didn't work, means it's past tense. We have enough data. We have 10, 12 data points, and we did not see the growth we needed to see. We're ready to make a change to the tier. So this one's a change within the tier. This one's a change to the tier. This is from tier 2 to tier 3 to special ed, for example. So we have one of these 4 decisions based on progress monitoring data. If it worked, good, we're celebrating. Is working, keep doing what you're doing. Isn't working, make a change to the tier. Didn't work, make a change. Make a change within the tier. Didn't work, make a change to the tier. So I would argue the basis of a good MTSS is assessment. Good screeners that are designed to screen, and that's what those data are designed to do, and that's how we use them. We don't make diagnostic decisions. We look at the data for screening, identify who needs help. Then we look more closely at the exact buckets of phonemic awareness and word level accuracy, et cetera. And then we dive even more deeply to see where are the foundational, what's the exact foundational skill we should be targeting. And we use those data to drive intervention and instruction. And then lastly, we monitor progress. That's an MTSS system. Those things. We have those things in place, along with all the other things that we talked about in terms of good core instruction and the things that we've talked about the past 2 webinars, and you'll have a good foundation for success. Now, I wanted to end at 6:15 to save time for questions. I hope people felt they could ask questions during, but I will certainly, we have 15 minutes now to see if there are any questions and if any of my colleagues want to jump in and add to anything that I just said. Okay, good. That's a good question. So do we need to consider implementation data, attendance data? Yes. So Mary Jo, that's a wonderful question. So what I do is, if I have, you can make that, I keep talking about number of data points. If after 4 weeks worth of data, you don't have enough data to say the intervention didn't work, but you could look at the data and say intervention isn't working. So we have, I actually have a checklist I'm happy to share, where we walk through and look at things like attendance, behavior during intervention, dosage, fidelity, and are we seeing, is there some sort of reason why these interventions aren't being effective? And we fix that first. I had a grant in 2010, started in 2010, and we worked with Minneapolis Public Schools. And we basically did everything I just showed you. We had good targeted intervention. We had good progress monitoring, good fidelity, et cetera. And what we found is across 6 schools, 6 schools. So I mean, 2,000 kids probably, I'm not gonna do the math. We were doing tier 2 intervention with a ton of kids. We only found 17 out of that of all 6 of those schools that needed to go to a tier 3 intervention. Because once we saw they weren't doing well, intervention isn't working, we started looking at attendance, fidelity, etc. And we found a problem and we fixed it, and then the kids did better. So we only found 17 kids for whom we had to move to tier 3. So those questions you just raised, Mary Jo, I think that was your name, are very important. But I would argue do them systematically. So give your grade level teams a checklist of those things: attendance, intervention, fidelity. I would throw in behavior during intervention. So if the kid is not doing well in intervention because they're not paying attention, or because they're in trouble and so not getting the intervention because they're in the office or something like that. So look at those. Oh, I forgot the fourth: attendance, fidelity, behavior, and there's a fourth. Anyway, I'll happily share with you. So my email address is right there in my Twitter handle, or X, I guess now. But I think it's okay to say tweet me. Saying X me just sounds wrong. Don't X me, but you can tweet me. So yeah, I would look at those, and if you email me on my email, I'll happily send you that sheet. So yes, can I explain again a change within a tier? Intervention isn't working. That means you can change a lot of things in the intervention. You're just not going to change the amount of resource. So that means you can add an incentive. You can change the focus. Maybe you're doing fluency, and whoops, he needs basic decoding, so we missed that. Let's go back and do decoding. You can change the focus. You can change the dosage. You can add minutes. You can make the group smaller. All of those things. Just we're not going to move from tier 2 to tier 3. That's all. So basically, any change you want to make is fine as long as you're not moving from tier 2 to tier 3, or worse. If really tier 2 to tier 3 doesn't matter. Tier 3 to special ed. If you're looking at RTI types decisions, and you've got 6 weeks worth of data and you're putting a kid in special ed, that's a problem. Other than that, almost the other changes you can make within the tier. Beneficial growth to have with intervention. I'm sorry, what is a beneficial growth? Well, that depends. I compute the slope needed for the benchmark criteria. So let's say you're using Dibbles, and I'm making these numbers up. Let's say it's like 40 in the fall, 70 in the winter, and 80 in the spring. So I compute and see, based on the number of weeks in the school year, what's the rate of growth to maintain that? And that's my criterion. There are norms. I don't love norms for interpreting data, these types of data, but there are norms. If you Google Ames Web norms, you can get norms for growth. I think Dibbles has norms for growth as well. But for me, I want to see at least a rate of growth that at least matches the proficient readers. That's my goal. Yeah, Mary Jo, if you email me, please, I'll happily send that to you. And you can modify it. Yeah, thanks. Any other questions? Great. Thank you. This was fun. Thank you. Valor, Holly, anything to add at the end? Cool.